Alright, this is going to be a campaign diary for a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons campaign. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's a term I'm going to steal from Matt Colville, link down below. I'm not sure if he coined it, but essentially I'm going to be distilling and chronicling my group's Dungeons & Dragons campaign. This is actually only my 2nd time dungeon mastering, and I have the rare fortune, I don't think it happens very often, where all of my players are playing Dungeons & Dragons for the first time. So I have a little more experience under my belt. I've played a few more games, but it's been very interesting so far, and that's kind of why I wanted to chronicle this. We are playing The Lost Mines of Phandelver. The first time I dungeon mastered, I made the dubious decision to also create my entire campaign. Very ambitious. I had some cool ideas, but it was way more than I could handle. Bit off way more than I can chew. You know, the prep time of writing the adventure and also figuring out all the monsters and all the math beforehand was just a little too much. So this time we very conveniently have everything written beforehand so I can focus on teaching these guys how to play and focusing on giving them a really good experience. So, you know, because I feel a little bit of pressure since this is their first taste of Dungeons & Dragons, I want them to continue to play afterwards. But the reason this is happening is a former co-worker's son developed an interest in Dungeons & Dragons, and he knew I was into it. So he asked me to come run a game for his birthday, his son's birthday. And how do you pass that up? How do you pass up running Dungeons & Dragons as a birthday gift? I love bringing myself as a birthday gift, so I said yes. I'm going to be keeping these guys anonymous, so eventually when I introduce the characters, we'll be calling them by that. But immediately there were a couple challenges. One of them being that my former co-worker doesn't come from a tradition at all of playing these kinds of games. He's older, he's an adult, he has a family, but he didn't really have this growing up. So it's kind of a big gap. And then on the other side, his son was super duper excited about it. So it was kind of like a million questions a minute. And so juggling those two extremes was a bit difficult. I also learned that when I got there, I was expecting to have 3 or 4 players, but it was just going to be him and his son playing. So I was like, well, I don't want to kill you guys. So we'll see what happens. But I gave the birthday boy the chance to choose who he was playing first. And he chose the Halfling Rogue, which he named Chicken Wings. We didn't have birthday lunch yet, so I think that was on his mind. And his dad, you know, he wasn't really attached to anyone, so he asked his son, who do you want me to play? And his son, the birthday boy, chose for his dad the Half-Elf Wizard, which his dad named Philip. Just Philip. And so I got a little more worried. These guys were the more squishy of the 4 to 5 possibilities, the other 2 being a fighter and a cleric. But, you know, can't argue with the birthday boy. It's what he wants to do. It's his adventure. So off we go. We join our heroes on the Sword Coast. They set out from the city of Neverwinter because they've been hired by Gundren Rockseeker to bring supplies to a developing town known as Phandelver. So I asked them, how do you guys know each other? Why are you guys working together? And they kind of paused, and I was like, do you know each other for a while? Have you worked with each other in the past? You guys are just kind of hired hands, your old hats at this? And they were like, yeah. And that's when I realized this was their first encounter with role-playing. They had never experienced coming up with a backstory or getting into a character before, so I rolled right along. And I slipped right into having them on the road traveling to Phandelver. And I think I did it pretty well because it took Philip a moment and he was like, oh, we're playing now. And I was like, yes. So I was kind of proud of that. That was a nice little moment. But these guys are on the road with their wagon of supplies and they take a left down the Tribord Trail towards the town of Phandelver, and they come across 2 dead horses in the road. And they hesitate, but they do approach the horses, and they get ambushed by goblins. It's the first encounter, it's goblins. And this is where they started to learn how combat works, and I could tell that Philip was immediately overwhelmed. Remember that he had never played any game like this before, and his son had handed him the wizard, which is definitely one of the more complicated things to grasp when you first started playing the game. But, you know, again, birthday boy. But so I kind of ushered them through it. I do more telling them what to do and less explaining why. Because, you know, I'm hoping that as they go along, as they do it more and more, they'll start to grasp why eventually. And so I thought it would be more expeditious, more fun, if I told them what to do and they kind of learned that way. Again, this is my second time dungeon mastering, so I myself am still learning how to do it. But, you know, battle goes fine. They beat up the 2 goblins with swords, and the third one, who was shooting arrows from the bush, sees that he's outnumbered and books it. So Chicken Wings and Philip inspect the bodies of the goblins and the bodies of the horses, and I could tell that Chicken Wings knew enough about Dungeons and Dragons already because he asked what the goblins have on them. And I told them, you know, these are the raiding goblins. They don't really have any loot on them. They're looking for loot to bring back. But the horses do have a satchel on them with GR on them. And, you know, they don't quite get it, so I tell them, hey, that's Gundren Rockseeker's initials. And I'm like, you know, this is your employer, you better go find him. I didn't say it quite so explicitly, but I could tell they were kind of unsure what to do, so I felt more comfortable nudging them in the direction of the stuff I had prepared. So they pursue the goblin who's running away, and you know he's running away to the goblin lair, so they've set up a couple traps in case people follow them. But, you know, Chicken Wings is leading the way, and he spots the traps, and I think that made Chicken Wings feel pretty good. You know, he was able to avoid any danger for both him and Philip. So they arrive at this Goblin Cave, and I was surprised because they didn't really want to go into the cave. They didn't see any goblins yet, but I guess they don't have the bloodthirst of regular Dungeons & Dragons adventurers yet. But, you know, I remind him, hey, Gundren could be in there. He's your employer. He's the reason you got hired. And so they eventually kind of creep forward, and awaiting them in a thicket are 2 goblin guards. And the text says, you know, if the adventurers aren't being stealthy and the goblins don't notice them ahead of time, then neither side is surprised, just combat. If the adventurers were more stealthy, then they had a chance to surprise the goblins. If the adventurers were loud, then the goblins might get a jump on them. But, you know, it just went straight to it. So that battle goes fine. They easily handle those 2 goblins. And again, Chicken Wings is almost immediately like, hey, what do they have on them? And I was like, okay, you know, they are just kind of patrol, clearly. So they don't really have anything on them, but they were enjoying a meal. And that's, you know, that's why they weren't being particularly good at their job. The text says that the goblins are very lazy and kind of look out for themselves rather than all the other goblins. So I thought that would be a good setup for why they weren't particularly being good guards. But again, they were very, very hesitant to go in this cave. They almost wanted to ditch it and just head back to town. And at this point, it had been a while. You know, it was a lot of explaining how to play the game. And so I was like, well, why don't we break here? And then maybe next time you can look into getting like 1 or 2 more players, and then it'll be much easier for you to go conquer that cave. So the first session was quite the whirlwind. It was definitely a different experience from a lot of the other games I've played. But, you know, I could tell Chicken Wings was very excited to play for the first time and excited to play the amount they got to play. And Philip actually told me the week after we played, Chicken Wings asked every day when they were going to play next. So we did set up a second session, and so we'll do that next time. I'm catching up on these diaries because we actually have played 2 times, and I should go ask Philip when we're going to play a 3rd time. So tune in next time when we join our heroes in the Goblin Cave.